Hi guys, welcome to the Nick Spotlight Masterclass. Thank you for logging on. And today we'll be talking about mistakes beginners make. So, first and foremost, we're going to be, well, not we, but Amanda will be discussing housekeeping as we always do.
Yeah,
Amanda.
super quickly. So, the advice contained in this presentation is not personalized. We have not conducted an assessment of you and your circumstances. Your broker and your accountant are qualified to do that, and so are we down the track if you choose to engage our services. So, the advice that we give today, it's not really advice, it's more warnings against mistakes beginners make. It is generally in nature. If you have already made some of these mistakes, it's okay, it doesn't matter, everything's recoverable. Or if you're advised into doing one of the things that we say, oh, maybe don't do that again, per your circumstances, maybe different advice might be appropriate for you. So take today's presentation with a grain of salt in terms of what may or may not fit individually to you. Take what does fit, leave what doesn't. But generally speaking, today we are going to be discussing the mistakes that beginner investors make. So before we begin, take a look at our disclaimer. And then if you have a look there at our list of spotlights, hopefully you've been working your way through them all and this one's not your first, or if it is, welcome. But as you can see, they do work in pairs. So today we're going to be talking about the mistakes that beginning investors make, but then we're going to look at the mistakes that seasoned investors make. So there isn't a point where you become immune from error. Yes, experience will help you stop making certain errors, but as you grow out of some mistakes, you will grow into others. So you have to be constantly mindful. You'll always be a student. We are both still students. There's no such thing as a master in this game. We're all always students. We're all always learning. But what we want to do is just flag some of the more common mistakes in this presentation that beginners make and in the twin presentation that seasoned investors make. So
That's
here
right.
we go.
And guys, please, if you have any questions or want to discuss anything, QR code is up. Scan this, book a 15-minute discovery session with myself. Alternatively, you can go to propertysessions.com.au/15 and book that way. A little bit about myself. So, where to begin? As always,
$1 million question. Every spotlight class.
every spotlight class, I don't do this very well. Anyway, so my background, parents from former Yugoslavia migrated to Australia in the 70s. I grew up in Sydney. One of the areas I first started growing up is Redfern. Some of you may know Redfern in Sydney. Um, I grew up as the only child and surrounded myself with my friends at school who had the shoes I wanted and had the skateboards and the bicycles and all that sort of fancy stuff where I was wearing the cheapy Kmart stuff. Not that anything's wrong with that, but obviously, it sort of lit a fire in my gut to later in my adult life have a bit of a drive for success. In my early stages, in my 20s, I started a photography studio that grew from 3 people to 15 staff eventually. Within that first year, the year after of that studio, I started investing in property, talking about mistakes. I would say the first few years were mistakes, but I've learned through them and pedaled out of having those issues through education. Um, Fast forward 20 years later, I'm teaching my kids on having a mindset of, investing and all that sort of stuff, educating them. So when they get into their adulthood, they don't make the mistakes that I did. But also now with this business, teaching my clients also the right way on how to strategize in investing in property. I did that okay. Amanda.
Obviously, it was self-assessment at the end. I did well today. Like every masterclass, we should patch together. Yeah, I did well. I did good. Yes, you did.
I did all right.
You want a treat?
I'm already having one.
Alrighty. So about me, again, you guys have already heard it all, so I'll keep it short. This masterclass is on mistakes. So Dragon talked about how his first few years of investing, he made a lot of the common mistakes that we are going to be talking about today. I fortunately was saved from a lot of them because my parents and my grandparents invested quite heavy. Maybe not so much my grandmother on one side. You'll hear about her in another masterclass. But my parents were investors and they taught us kids very young to be financially literate. I've talked before about how we used to watch Money as a family every week, Paul Clitheroe. I was very interested as a kid. I used to read the Holmes Pictorial on the school bus because I was super cool. So it was always ingrained in us. So by the time we were of an age where we could buy property, it was just the way we thought. It wasn't a new concept to us. So fortunately, I did avoid a lot of the early mistakes that people commonly make because I had a lot of people to learn from who had made the mistakes before me and warned me against them. So my journey doesn't necessarily mean that it's been absolutely perfect and that I've always made the right call because nobody has a crystal ball, but I've been able to potentially fast track past a lot of that stuff. So despite being quite young still, I've done very, very well. So I've got almost 20 years experience and currently working towards my Master of Property Development because I'm now leveling up into that space in my own projects. So my background is in teaching. You'll have heard me talk about that at length in other masterclasses.
Sorry. So, she talks well.
Hmm.
That's why I gave her 80% of the of this job.
If you watch one of the other ones, he tries to outsource his job. So if you've been watching all of these, you'll have a fairly good idea of our personalities and our banter. So please join the family and help me pile on over here. All right, let's go through these mistakes. Beginner mistake number 1. What is it?
Not having a long-term plan.
Why is that a mistake?
Well, because you don't have a goal on the direction you want to head.
Yeah.
And then where do you go?
Le-
Where do you start?
It leads to very erratic and
Exactly.
inconsistent decision making.
Yep.
If you don't have a long-term plan, because
Sorry to cut you in. Typical example, I just want to get into the market. I'm going to buy an apartment somewhere in the city and then it's going to double in 5 years or 10. I mean, these are some of the comments I get,
yeah, they just buy whatever they can.
whatever they can. And I did that mistake. My first investment was an apartment and it was the wrong investment because I was paying too much money. I overpaid. Then I was paying all the money and then there was strata fees and then all the, everything else that came with it. And suddenly I realized, well, this investment is
Money
not
pit.
a money pit. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you have a long-term plan, what that means is that you know your end game. And when you know your end game, your end point, you can reverse engineer from where we are now, which is point A, to what your end point is, which is point B. And if you can determine what your point A and your point B is, then all you've got to do is build in the plan that falls in between that gets you from one to the other. So having a long-term plan means knowing your end game. We do have masterclasses that help you determine that. So if you look at how many properties do you actually need, if you look at that masterclass, that will help you determine, well, what is your end game? What should it be? You can also work that out with Dragon as well in a core. But essentially not having a long-term plan is beginner mistake number 1. They get started, but they don't really know what they're doing because they don't know where they're going. So, beginner mistake number 2.
Trying to time the market.
Trying to time the market. So we've got a whole masterclass on this topic as well. Timing the market versus time in the market.
Yes.
So what we hear from a lot of people is, oh, we've just had a boom. I don't want to buy now. Oh, I think a boom is coming. I better buy. They try to, or they listen to the media, or they listen to the fear, or they listen to Uncle Bob at the barbecue, and they get it in their head like this is the wrong time to buy, or this is the right time to buy, or there's a big crash coming. And they keep convincing themselves that there's something wrong with the timing, so they never take action. And then the time passes and years go by and they still haven't taken action, but the market has kept outpaying them. So trying to time the market, I think if I put my psychologist hat on, and I'm not a psychologist, but I'm going to pretend to be one for a minute. Sometimes I think people use the it's the wrong time thing to address maybe what could be underlying fear. So they can rationalize a reason to justify their fear, then they can justify their inaction. Okay. Sometimes you've got to push past that. The greatest growth happens outside your comfort zone, not inside of it. So we're not saying don't be reckless, but be sensible in knowing that long term the market will go up. Okay. So if you look at our masterclasses on timing the market and time in the market, the twins, look at both of those and that will help you address not making mistake number 2
That's
by
right.
trying to time the market.
Okay.
Number 3,
Not diversifying.
not diversifying. So what we find is when people don't use a buyer's agent, they tend to buy where they know, right? They'll buy where they live. And if you look at our masterclass on the 10 myths of property investment, one of the myths looks at, should you buy where you know or should you follow the numbers? Now, a lot of people feel more comfortable buying where they know because they know what they're buying, right? You know your suburb or your local area and you feel more informed and therefore more empowered to make an informed decision. By using a buyer's agent and diversifying into other areas where the numbers make sense,
Yeah.
but areas that you may not necessarily have a familiarity with yourself can help you because you're diversifying into different markets. So if we go back to that property clock in the timing and the timing of those two masterclasses, try and catch all those before coming to this one because I refer back to them. But if you look at that property clock, different areas of Australia, different markets will be at different points in the clock. So part of diversifying as well is making sure that you are always operating across different timings so that something is always growing, right? If you've got all your eggs in one area, in one basket, then you're always on that same cycle. So you're waiting longer for growth.
That's right.
Diversifying helps you mitigate against that.
Yeah. Letting emotion rule.
Yes. Number 4, making decisions based on emotion.
Yep.
We see this one a lot. Like clients will look at a property like, oh, the carpet is ugly, I'm not going to buy it. Or oh, I don't like the kitchen. I wouldn't use that kitchen, or I don't like this, or I don't like that. You're not the one living in it. So what you like doesn't matter. If you don't like the carpet, okay, spend $3,000 to put new carpet in if you really want. But if there's something about the property that you wouldn't live in, it doesn't mean that a tenant won't live in it. If market value is market value, whether you yourself would pay that market rent is irrelevant. So try not to judge a property based on your own emotions. Try to judge it based on the numbers. By the same token, that goes for purchase price as well. Try not to get caught up in the hype. If a real estate agent has another 5 or 10 grand and you go, look, I'm already at my limit and I'm already at the limit of where I see value, then don't pay overs because it's an investment property. You're just there to follow the numbers. If you're buying something to live in and you really want that property in 10 grand, you can easily justify that for a principal place of residence. But for an investment property, every extra cent comes off your bottom line. So again, getting caught up in emotions is a mistake that beginner investors often make, or they get the FOMO, fear of missing out. In a rising market, they panic. So they might buy something inferior or pay too much for something. So just being aware that regardless of how you feel, if the numbers work, if the math is mathing, your emotions is just discomfort and fear, and deal with that as discomfort and fear, not as confirmation that you're doing the wrong thing. Because if the numbers work, the numbers work. Number 5.
Not understanding the game.
Why do you reckon I called it a game?
Because it is a game.
It is a game and it's a fun one.
Yep.
Treat it like a game. Once you own the properties, treat it like a business. But while you're hunting, treat it as a game because that's what it is. You're hunting for properties. You're hunting for deals. Yeah, it's labor intensive and you're dealing with real estate agents and you're dealing with indecisive vendors and whatever. Yeah, like it's a game. And to manage your stress levels, you need to treat it as a game. And a game requires strategy. Okay, you don't go and play Monopoly or Pictionary or whatever games. And, you don't just go in all willy-nilly. Maybe you do. But you're always thinking about your next move. You're always thinking about your strategy. And you have to do the same with property. So we talked about the end point, but you also need to look at what you're doing in between to get to that end point. So to understand the game, you might go, okay, well, if I need finance and I buy something negatively geared, then I'm out of pocket. But if I buy something positively geared first and then buy something negatively geared, then the positive on that covers the negative on that.
That's right.
So strategically, to play this game well, I should buy positive first, negative second, then positive, then negative, then positive, then negative. But if I buy 3 negative gears in a row, then I'm stuck.
And that's a
Okay.
mistake I actually did when I was
Of course it is, dude.
the first of all, it was apartments. And then second of all, they were all negatively geared.
And that compounds.
It does compound. And yeah.
So when interest rates go up,
Yep. And look, I was okay because I ran a business, but still, who wants to be forking out 20 something years ago, 30 something grand a year? 30 grand a year, 20 something years ago.
with that said, for some investors, negative gearing is a benefit. Catch our negative gearing masterclass.
Yep.
because in some cases, negative gearing is a good strategy. But generally speaking, because this is general advice,
Yeah.
you want to strategize your purchases to manage your cash flow.
Yeah.
Okay. If negative gearing is part of your strategy, awesome. There's a place for that. But what I'm sort of saying here is if you buy 3 negatives in a row and then you try and buy a positive to rescue you, it's too late. Pick up the positives first, then pick up the negatives if that's your strategy. So not understanding the game, it's not just about buying properties and going, oh yeah, on its own merits, that one's good, and on its own merits, that one's good. But together, how do you strategize the whole portfolio? Because that's the game. And it's really fun, right? I love sitting down and running my numbers and going, okay, what do I buy next? Or what do I need to
It
do?
is.
Like, it's fun.
Yep.
So get that itch to play the game. Don't just treat it like I said, once you own the properties, you run them like a business. You know, you've got to look at your profit and your cash flow and where you spend money and where you don't. That part of it is also a game, but it's a very business game. That's where, again, I'm going to talk about my husband. I feel like all of today's ones are about him, but that's where we work really well as a team because I enjoy the hunt. He doesn't enjoy the hunt. He gets very bored very quickly with the unpredictability of it. He's a very stable man. I call him a robot. He's a robot. That's, to be honest.
Nice.
The man's a robot, right? So he likes, once we own them, just managing them. I'll do with the property managers. I'll do it. You know, he likes that part. So we work really well as a team because I do the hunting and the purchasing and the negotiating and all the unpredictable stuff. But then as soon as we buy them, that's when I get bored because I've bought it now. I don't care. I hand it to him. No problem.
I enjoy the negotiation part.
Same.
Where
I
I
love the chase.
I'm the type that I get an address, a property sent to me. I do my due diligence. I know that property is worth $1 million, let's just say. And for some reason, you know what? I'm gonna offer them 850 and see what they say. And believe me, it's happened a handful of times where they've accepted it.
Yeah.
And for myself or for my clients, it's the biggest win. That's that fantastic feeling you get,
Yeah.
when you're winning for your clients or yourself.
Yeah.
And it does happen, unless you're in the game, you're not going to see those deals.
Yeah.
So, and they happen often, believe me.
That's the bit that I love. It's like a dopamine hit.
Yeah. And I know I've spoken about this in the previous Spotlight masterclasses. Some of you who haven't already seen it ask the question, well, why would someone, $1 million property sell you an 850? Well, because they've probably, perfect example, they've just purchased a house. They need to get rid of this one to fund the next one, or they're going to lose a lot of, their deposit because they're upgrading. And they've had that house, that they purchased probably for 350,000 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So they have a deal on the table, they'll take it. Remember, I'm working for my clients as a buyer's agent. So my job for my clients is to get them the best deal. Their selling agent is to get them the best possible price. If they accept, a deal is done, right? So, and anyway, that's
all part of the game,
all
right?
part of the game.
There's all different players in the game. And as I say, don't hate the player, hate the game. So if someone's agent gives them poor advice and they undersell, they've appointed that agent to represent them.
Yeah.
You've appointed your agent to represent you. You let your agents play their game. Hopefully you win it.
Yep.
Let's keep rolling. Beginner mistake number 6.
Yep. Doing the wrong math. What does that mean?
It's probably more your wheelhouse.
Oh, well, doing the wrong math in.
So do clients come to you with misconceptions about
Yeah,
that?
they do. So I get a lot of clients saying, hey, Dragon, I've seen this property. It's an apartment. For some reason, it's always an apartment, or not necessarily. But what they do is they say, hey, this particular, I've spoken to another selling agent, buying agent, financial, dealer, wealth creator. And they say to me, look, that's a 7% return on this apartment. It looks great. Could be off the plan. Once it's finished, it's going to get me a rental guarantee. Warning when they give you that. And it looks great. As soon as we sit down and actually do the cost analysis on just your standard house, that's say a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 10-year-old home, in comparison to what they've given me example, as soon as you punch the numbers in, you're going to realize that the returns on the house is greater than what's, you're going to eventually pay on strata and everything else. In saying that as well, and we have spoken about this on the last Spotlight Masterclass, what's the value of the property year by year going to grow? The house, in general, the house always outdoes an apartment or a townhouse. Fact.
Mm. I think as well, a lot of the math that people come to us with is math that they've been given as marketing rather than proper
That's right.
proper math. So what I mean by that is they'll come to us and, oh, this property is going to put $300 a week in my pocket.
Yep.
And I go, that can't be figured out because, like, if that's the example that you're bringing me, well, I can make any property put $300 a week in your pocket because I'll just reduce your loan size. Yeah, that can put $300 a week in your pocket if your deposit's $500,000.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can manipulate the numbers to get any outcome you want by adjusting the variables accordingly, right? So that's all good and well if you have a $500,000 deposit, but if you don't, well, what is it really paying you, right? Or they'll go, oh, we got these deals for our clients, but they'll use numbers that are client specific based on that client's deposit or income, not based on the actual value of the property and the rental income, which are objective.
Yep.
No matter who buys it, that's what the purchase price was and that's what the rent is.
Yeah.
But they manipulate the numbers using the client's wealth status to make the deal look healthier than it was.
That's right.
So then people come to us going, I want a deal like that. And we go, well, you will when it's your fifth or your sixth property and you've built that wealth. But until then, no, we've got to get you there.
And the other thing is, a lot of people are marketing certain properties where, and even on their call when they're signing them up, they're saying, hey, we're going to get you a 7% property, even if they're houses, or not talking about away from apartments now, where they're saying, oh, look, they're going to give me a 7% return. And I said, okay, well, that's gross. It's different if it's, there's a difference between net and gross. And it's always a good idea to understand, yes, Amanda was right in regards to the interest rates, the deposits size. But what you want to do, let's work off forget the deposit size. Let's work off 100% loan. Okay. What I would get you to do to work out the net figure is write down what the potential rent could be for that loan. Okay. Times that by 52 for the whole year, divide that by the cost of the property, but add in all the expenses. So what does that mean? So council rates add in the insurance, add in the 7 or 8% property management fees, add in, what am I missing? Add in water into it, depends on the state. After you added all that in, calculate what's left in your pocket, and that should give you the net figure. And this is the real figure you should be looking at. It's great for someone to market you a higher amount when it looks fine as a gross figure, but you need to know the net figure of that return.
Yeah, so just know when the maths is marketing and when the maths is maths, right? So when you do sit down with Dragon and he puts a deal in front of you, it'll be proper maths, right? Not marketing spin. So just be aware, because a lot of beginners get enchanted into deals that end up becoming money pits that they thought would be money makers.
That's right.
All right, beginner mistake number 7.
Playing the short game.
Yes, this is being too short-sighted, which we've kind of touched on in the accumulation of all the others. But playing the short game essentially means making decisions in the moment without looking at how those decisions impact you later. So whether that's a structuring decision, like purchasing in the wrong partner's name or the wrong entity, whether that's a financial decision like paying too much or selling at the wrong time or selling instead of refinancing. There's a million different ways that you can make a short-sighted or reactive decision that has consequences later. So that one, I mean, there's a gazillion examples that we can give there. Just be aware that any decision you make, think of the long-term impacts of that decision. Even basic things like if you're married and you're purchasing, whose name do you put the property in, or do you create another entity? If you're thinking about selling the property, run the maths on just pulling out the equity instead. See if after capital gains tax and transaction costs, you might end up with more money in your pocket just pulling out the equity. So just be really mindful of every decision you make and looking at where that advice comes from. What does the person giving the advice stand to gain as well? And how does that influence the advice that they're giving? Just be aware that you're not making decisions in the short term that will impact you negatively in the long term. All right,
Okay.
beginner mistake number 8.
No contingency cash.
Why the green? You've done that one too. Good Lord. Tell us about it.
No, I haven't actually, but I know someone that will, and I won't mention who, or I won't say the story. Anyway, all good. Please.
That's a bit of a cliffhanger.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So people often ask, like, how much contingency cash do I need? Okay. There's a few different ways to look at this. Some people go, you need 6 months worth of repayment. Like, if your property's empty for 6 months, you've got to be able to carry it. Like, yeah, okay. But we also have this thing called insurance. So if your property is empty for 6 months for a non-insurable reason, you've bought a bad investment. Just sell the stupid thing, right? Like, there's very few reasons why a property should be empty for that length of time that isn't covered by insurance. Would you agree?
Yeah, I have not ever seen a property,
No.
unless it was a commercial property that
Yeah,
I've seen, but
Yeah, but
you
this
know,
is what I'm saying, right? So contingency cash, when we say like the traditional wisdom is 6 months, for every property, like that's a lot of money sitting there in cash, not doing anything, when I can't think of a single non-insurable reason, well, unless you've bought an absolute lemon in some regional town out the back.
I know that regional, yeah.
Yeah, like I can't. So the responsible advice is, yeah, do that. The real advice, the practical advice, I can't justify
Yeah,
that conventional wisdom. And I've never done it. I can honestly, hand on heart, say, if I've got that amount of cash, I'm reinvesting it. I'm not letting it sit there.
100%.
Now, if I need cash on short notice, can I access equity? Can I access it in some other way? Yeah, like there's always somewhere where you can extract money, right? But to have it sitting there in cash for that amount, no. So how much contingency cash should a beginner have? When we were in the beginning of our journey, and you might disagree, we used to have like each property's got its own account. So the rent comes in and the expenses go out of one account per property. So we can see the cash flow. Like each property has its own statement.
Yep.
So we used to have a rule, excuse me, this hot chocolate's making me hiccup. We used to have a rule that each property account should not go below 5K, right? And that was more just if the mortgage repayment came out before the rent went in. Like that's all we wanted to cover, 5K buffer in case the mortgage repayment beat the rent coming in and out each month. Other than that, I don't think we've ever had more than that in contingency cash,
Yeah, same.
Now, I call it a beginner mistake for the opposite reason why you might think. A lot of beginners think, well, I can't buy until I've got enough contingency cash. Or they think that property investment's not available to them because I'm just not swimming in cash. You don't have to be swimming in cash. If you've got enough to get through the repayment cycle not lining up with the rent cycle, I would argue that plus insurance is okay. If you really get stuck, you can also ring your lender to pause your repayments. Okay.
Have we spoken about this?
We've spoken about this at length in multiple masterclasses. So instead of holding cash, you can actually just mitigate your expenses. So you can pause your repayments with your lender, and they will, usually for 3 months without question, or they might get you to fill out like a token little bit of paperwork. Generally speaking, if the property is empty for whatever reason, generally, again, insurance comes into play if there's a reason. If there's no reason why it's empty, then you've either got a bad property or a bad property manager. There are reasons for these things, right? So the contingency cash is there really if you've made a bad investment. If you've used a good buyer's agent, then you're unlikely to have made a bad investment.
Yep.
So this one's an interesting one because I feel like a lot of people lock themselves out of investing because they don't have enough cash in their mind. My response to that is if you've got insurance and you can ring your lender and pause repayments if needed, or you've bought in an area where there's low vacancy rates, you don't need more than a couple of K per property.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, true.
But conventional wisdom would say that I'm wrong.
And look, I'm gonna make another side note. There's a lot of people that don't like and I've had these discussions throughout the years, don't like purchasing investment properties because they say, oh, well, I've heard this story where a tenant was in the house and, they didn't pay rent for 2 months. And when they left, they destroyed the kitchen and made holes in the wall and broke the tiles in the bathroom. And I'm like, did they have insurance? I said, yes. Well, guess what? They get a whole new renovation done on top of their rent getting paid back, right? So as long as you got insurance, you know,
Yep.
there's nothing to be really worried about.
I mean, you do have to hold the costs in between
Yep.
the extent of the damage and
of course.
insurance, but
Yep.
that's where a good property manager should be doing their job,
Yep.
right? So if it gets to the point where this drags on for months and months, you've got to be asking questions to your property manager.
Yeah. And the other thing is you only hear the bad stories, you never hear the good stories. And believe me, there are so much more good stories.
Oh, the good one. Yeah, like he said, a free renovation,
Yeah.
all your rent paid back, and a nicely depreciable new asset.
That's right.
You're winning.
For me, I've got clients calling me up going, oh my God, I'm worried about my, the cyclone that's happening at the moment in Brisbane. And they're telling me, you've got properties up in Brisbane or around Queensland, aren't you worried? And I said, well, no, they're all insured for cyclone and flooding like yours, as I recommended, should be. I go, well, I'm worried. And I said, well, if the cyclone takes the house, guess what? You get a new house,
one.
brand new.
How good's that?
That's right. Anyway, please.
There's always a silver lining, and he's got to look for it sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, it was my turn again. QR code, guys. Any questions you have, you've got the QR code, scan, book that time in the discovery session with myself, have your questions ready. Otherwise, go to property session. I always do that. propertysessions.com.au/15. Let's have a discussion. It will be with myself. Any questions you have, I'm happy to answer, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.